When I first moved to New York, I always thought, oh my gosh, who owns that building? What I always thought is, well, you can't own something if you can't buy it. And it's just not true. They believe this myth that you can't invest unless you have really large amounts of money.
I was a stay-at-home mom and I was looking for something that was intellectual to do. So I wanted to find something for which I could learn it, do it, and then have him take over from me. And I didn't just have some brilliant product idea, I started with investing what's called passively. So I partnered with experienced people who knew what they were doing for my first deal or first apartment building.
How do you think about the future of real estate in an uncertain economic time?
I think that
Welcome to the Millionaire Hairstylist, where our mission is to improve the financial well-being of creative professionals. This week, a two-part series on investing in real estate for busy professionals through something called syndication. If you listen to our last episode, Hunter Thompson referred to real estate syndication kind of like crowdfunding for real estate investment. And our guest today, Sandhya Seshadri, who's the CEO of Engineered Capital, will take us even deeper into what that looks like. She has a great way of explaining these concepts. So if the last episode intrigued you, but you wanted to learn more or you wanted to get a better sense of how these things work, this is going to be a great conversation to listen to. As a reminder, nobody on this episode is a financial advisor or a lawyer, so please consult both when making any important decision with your money. And if this podcast is providing you value as a creative professional, help us let others know it is out there. And all you have to do is leave us a 5-star review in the podcast platform of your choice. Okay, here we go. Passive real estate investment for busy creatives, part 2 with Sandhya Seshadri on The Millionaire Hairstylist. And I will say that in this week we release 2 episodes a week on our podcast, Sandhya, and combined with your interview here is our conversation with Hunter Thompson, which I know is super relevant to this whole world and this connection. So Cash, maybe tell us that backstory. And then Sandhya, I'd love to hear your story as well.
Well, I met Sandhya. The first time I saw her, she was up on stage at a mastermind that I was attending. This was one thing that a friend of mine went to about real estate syndication and raising capital. So I went to this event called Raise Masters. Sandhya was speaking on stage, loved what she was talking about. Later on throughout that event, we found ourselves on a riverboat, and I was talking to a young girl who was brilliant, and she said, "Oh, Sandhya is my mom." And I was like, "Oh, I'd love to meet her." So met Sandhya, and she was absolutely a fireball and a huge success in the real estate syndication space and in raising money for multifamily real estate. And I was really impressed. So I thought, you know what? I've got to ask you some questions on the podcast. And here we are.
Amazing. Thank you for being with us.
So glad to be here. I love the opportunity to talk to people and tell them how I got to where I am.
Let's start there. How did you find yourself in this world that you're in now, multifamily real estate?
I was a stay-at-home mom doing a little bit of stock trading, etc. And I was looking for something that was intellectual to do, but which gave me the flexibility. I didn't want to go to corporate where I used to work in the past because the hours were too demanding. And I have 2 children. So my daughter is the one that Cash met, who's, on her own. She's in college. She's going to be on her own. But my son is highly functional autistic, and I don't think he's going to be quite going that path. So I wanted to find something for which I could learn it, do it, and then have him take over from me. And I was also looking for something where I could dictate the hours and which offered me some kind of tax advantages. And I didn't just have some brilliant product idea, let me take a boom, box and then turn it into an iPhone or something like that. So I turned to real estate because a lot of people do single family rentals, et cetera. And I wanted to learn that. But I realized by analyzing the numbers that the economies of scale weren't there. And I didn't have a strong construction background, to go and fix a leaky toilet on Thanksgiving Day. It just wasn't appealing to me. So I stumbled upon multifamily, which is buying large buildings for which none of us typically have the money. These buildings cost 10 million, 20 million kind of dollars of money, but each of us can put a tiny piece, invest a little bit and pool our money together to go buy a large building. And that was fascinating because you have economies of scale. So you can afford to pay somebody to do all of that day-to-day work for you, like a maintenance person could be there full-time on site to take care of that lovely leaky toilet. And you can have a property manager to do the rent collections and all of that work. And we become more of asset managers. And that was appealing to me. So I learned it. So I attended a weekend seminar, which taught me how to do all of that. And that's how I got started in this business. And that's what I do now is I operate large apartment buildings in the Dallas area.
That's
and how
incredible.
much money have you raised to date, or how much how much in value and assets under management do you guys have?
So right now I've got about $160 million worth of assets under management, and I've bought and sold 3 others. So,
wow. So
yeah.
running $160 million operation, that cannot be simple or easy to scale to. Can you tell us a little bit more about the journey that got you to that point? Obviously, you didn't start with $160 million and just go buy something. So how did it work?
I started with investing what's called passively, which is what I use the analogy of being a passenger in a plane. You just buy your ticket and you take a seat, and there's somebody else who's the pilot and co-pilot, kind of, steering this lovely aircraft to your final destination. So I was that passenger, and then I learned from the people who are the pilots and the co-pilots. So I partnered with experienced people who knew what they were doing for my first deal or first apartment building. That was actually 86 doors, and it was about $6.75 million. That was my first deal, and it was in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and it was back in 2019. And what happened was within about 8-9 months of us acquiring that, COVID hit in March 2020. And both my partners had a lot of experience in real estate in the past doing smaller deals, like 20, 30, 40 doors kind of deals. This one was 86 doors, and they wanted to get into the Dallas market. But they were both located out of state, and they couldn't travel once COVID hit. So they were the brains, but I was the brawn. I was always the one showing up to the properties, talking to the vendors, and all of that happened. And so just by default, because of those circumstances, I ended up learning a lot on the operations. I would spend more time on site, learning from the property managers, all the different trades, the maintenance, etc. And so I really got a hands-on experience at asset management. So that's what I kind of focus on. And we all have to raise capital, because capital is always the hardest thing to do. When you want to buy a building, you need the money. And so when you think of, let's say, a $10 million building, about $7 million of that is going to come from your lender, but you still need that remaining $3 million for your down payment, right? Just like when you buy a house, you get a loan for a certain amount, you got to put a down payment for the rest of it. And then any other extra rehab costs, you got to sometimes raise the money for it. And that's where raising capital comes in. And that's a trade I had to develop. So now that I can sound like I kind of know what I'm doing, it really helps when you talk to potential investors. And that's where the raising capital mastermind came from with Hunter Thompson, along with a couple of other coaches also I've had on doing that. So we've had totally on a $140 million worth of acquisitions, me and my partners combined, we've had to raise, $50, $60 million quite easily. And so last year, which is 2022, let me say, I personally raised about 14 million. And then my partners raised another, 25, 30 million. So we had about 75 million in acquisitions in the year of 2022.
Amongst how many investors did you, how many people involved in that amount that you raised? I think Hunter talked to us because we learned a little bit about this, Sandhya, from Hunter, understanding this whole process of real estate syndication. And he used, I think, a starting point of roughly $50,000. Is
Correct.
that generally how much each investor is putting in, or is it a lot more than that on average?
A lot of them are a lot more. Our average tends to be between 100 and 125, and we have anywhere from 50 to 100 investors, depending on the size of the deal. Like I have a $30 million deal for which the total raise was to the tune of, 15 million or so. And so we got a lot more investors, but I've had investors write me $1 million check. Not to me personally, it's to the property for the investment. But I've also had investors do the minimum 50,000. And I've had cases where, a couple of different family members to get together or friends get together, form an LLC, and the LLC comes in at 50K. So you don't personally have to have 50K, but maybe 2-3 of you get together and put together 50K, form an LLC, and then that LLC writes a single check to the investment for that 50K. So yeah. Investment amounts vary depending on the timing and what each investor has available to invest. Sometimes they sell their single family, they get tired of it. They don't want to deal with all these, leaky toilets and, all the other hassles of having to deal with tenants. And so a lot of them will sell their single family and come and write a check for, the $200,000-300,000 kind of thing to invest into a multifamily like this, because then they're hands-free. Once they do that investment, they're like the passengers. You sit back, relax, and enjoy the ride. Sometimes we have turbulence, so the meal service is disrupted, but overall, our goal is to get you to that destination like a pilot.
If you are a creative professional who wants to improve your relationship with money, go to millionairehairstylistpodcast.com, create a free student account, and you can access an entire library of educational resources geared at improving your financial well-being, including a lesson on the 3 phases of wealth building for creative professionals. Go to millionairehairstylistpodcast.com and sign up today.
I love the way that you explain this process so simply, because what I find is when I was younger, when I first moved to New York, I always thought, oh my gosh, who owns that building? Yeah. And I just didn't really realize that was such an ignorant question to ask. It's really like, what owns that building? What entity and group of people owns that building? Because I think what a lot of people who are successful in their jobs or careers, they're busy and they don't have time to go fix the toilets. They don't have time to go identify an investment opportunity. They don't have time to underwrite it. They don't have the time to go gain the skills to do those things. And so what I always thought is, well, you can't own something if you can't buy it. And that's just not true. Or you can't make an investment unless you can buy the whole thing. And a lot of people have this misunderstanding. They believe this myth that you can't invest unless you have really large amounts of money. And what you just talked about was sort of this concept of kind of like a fund of funds, so to speak, where, it's a fund made up of other funds where people can get together, form an LLC, put small amounts of money into it, and make one investment into a fund if the minimum is a little higher, 50,000, 100,000. I think it's brilliant and I think it's critically important that people understand there are so many ways you can invest in real estate without, like what you say, I think your main proposition to investors is earn passive income from real estate without fixing toilets, getting sued, all of the things that come along with owning real estate. So if you were just getting started today, looking for a passive income vehicle and to invest as a passive investor, what's some advice that you would give to somebody who's like, oh, wow, I don't have to have the 10 million, but I'm interested in becoming a part of that group that's buying that building and receiving income from that?
So there's a lot of advantages to doing that. And so I want to highlight a couple of them. One of them is you're not signing a loan. So when you decide to buy 10 single family houses, they're all what we call recourse loans. So I get limited. By the time I buy 3 or 4 houses, they're like, okay, you're not wealthy enough to get anything more than that, because the banks look at all of those loans. Versus, now I've signed on loans that are like 20 million for one building and 10 million another building, et cetera. And I can do that when you actually go and do these non-recourse loans. So there's no liability involved when you do this. On the passive side, you also don't have to do any of the work. So you don't get those calls for the leaky toilets. You're not signing the loans. You don't have any of the liens, liabilities, et cetera. And the vision a lot of people have when they buy this perfectly gorgeous single family home is the home is going to be perfect. It was newly built. There's going to be no problems with it. I'm going to get this ideal tenant who's going to pay their rents on time. And all I'm going to do is just sit back and the money is going to roll into my bank account. And every person who's done it, who I know as a friend, says the reality is far from it. Yeah. That they have hassles, residents don't pay, or they have complaints all the time, or you have to do so much rehab after they move out that for 2 months you're not collecting rent, but you still owe the mortgage, the utility bills, etc. So look at a realistic view of what would actually happen and the time you have to spend on a single family rental versus take the $50K, invest it in a syndication with somebody that you get to know, like, and trust, and with whom you have similar values. And make sure it's in a market that is landlord friendly, like New York City or California. I have friends with single family rentals where the residents haven't paid for like a year and all the bills are still due and all of that liability is on the owner. So you want to avoid such markets. I like to avoid high crime areas. I just don't think I can deal with drug lords and all of that and do that kind of a rough property. So I look for, nice family friendly areas near schools and with a diversity of jobs and industries. So go to a place where everybody's moving. If you just pick Detroit, Michigan, that might be or Midland, Odessa, they're kind of dependent on just one industry. So I like Dallas, Fort Worth. I like a lot of the Sun Belt states. I like Tennessee, Nashville. I like the Carolinas, etc., for my passive investments, which I still do. So even though I operate my deals in Dallas, I diversify. I have retirement money from my previous employer. So I can take that money and put it into passive investments and let it grow, I think, a little bit faster than just a random mutual fund that my employer allows me to put it in.
So what does it look like? You identify a person who has an opportunity, you make an investment into the fund, and you start collecting checks?
Most likely, you will start collecting checks. You will have to carefully read their terms to see how soon you start receiving it. But on the deals that I have done really well on, every quarter they get checks. Some people issue them monthly. And so you would read the documents in that, and you would be signing an agreement, just like when you sign the paperwork to put your money into a mutual fund or with a financial planner. And it's all done through a syndication firm. So these are legal attorneys. They do a title check and everything else. So, this is not some random Ponzi scheme, but that's how you verify that, do a background check. It's $50 or less to do a background check on someone. If you're going to write a $50,000 check to somebody, why not spend that $50 and do a background check, make sure the market is fine, and then review the paperwork, listen to the webinar if they have a presentation, understand the risks and the rewards. And remember that real estate is illiquid, meaning in 6 months, if you want the money back, then don't invest. This is definitely considered long-term, and every deal is a little different, but it could be 5 years, could be 7 years, could be 3 years. Understand that and make sure it matches your risk tolerance. Meaning you should be okay closing your eyes just like a 401k account and not worrying about it for the longer term, which is 5 to 10 years at least. So if you need the money within 2 years, I had an investor who said, my kid's going to college in 2 years. Will you sell this deal by then? I'm like, no, I may not. I may have to hold out. If interest rates are anything like what they are right now, it means this is not the best time to sell my asset. So I may have to hold it a little bit longer. So be okay with your money being illiquid. Do a background check. Assess your own risk tolerance and get to really know the people in charge. And then, you have to actually take action. Because a lot of us sometimes get stuck in analysis paralysis. We just read books, listen to podcasts like this, but then we don't take action. So I always say, give yourself a definite timeline and say within 3 months or within 4 months, I'm going to get these 15 questions answered and I'm going to make a decision. Give yourself a deadline to take action.
Wow. Cash, I know that a lot of our listeners are salon owners, and one of the sort of first frontiers of real estate consideration that a salon owner goes through is, should I either move to a building that I can buy, or in some cases, should I buy the building that I'm in? And owning your own salon real estate is something that is often extremely beneficial for all the reasons we've discussed in this podcast. We did a great interview with Sam Mercado about this a long time ago. The depreciation, the growth in the asset value, the rent you can collect from other tenants, et cetera. So I guess there's a question there, because if I'm a salon owner and I'm building up a war chest, Cash and I talk about, you're not saving your money, you're seeding your money to build something you can do the money with. I'm curious, Cash, what your thoughts would be, understanding that the devil is always going to be in the details of the individual deal. But what kind of person should be considering pursuing buying their building versus someone who says, you know what, I really should pursue the passive option of a syndication, like what Sandhya is suggesting? And I'm just curious, maybe just thinking out loud about some of the pros and cons of each of those approaches.
I think the way that I look at it with commercial real estate, which what Sandhya does is considered commercial real estate, and by any bank, they would be doing commercial loans, those type of loan structures. So the purchase of what she's buying and the purchase of buying a retail building is a similar debt structure, and so it would be similar terms. Now, the valuation of that building would be a little different, because if Sandhya is buying a multifamily, the value of that building can be based off of different appraisal methods or approaches, they call it. So like the income approach would be like, how much income is this building producing? And we can determine what we think it's worth based on the income. And then you have the comparable approach, where you could say, well, what do we think it's worth based on what other buildings like this are selling? So when you say, I'm in a position where I'm renting right now and my retail rents are getting really high, and you're considering, well, I wonder, what I should do with my money. You want to be considering the cost of ownership versus the cost of renting would be the first analysis I would start with. and you would say, what am I losing by renting based on what I could be getting if I purchased this building? And the reason, Sandhya, this is coming up a lot, which is like purchasing your own building and things like that and using commercial debt, is because the price of commercial is going down so much due to decreased demand that there's a big opportunity in these retail spaces right now where retailers are moving out. And as the price goes down, the interest rate is not as impactful if you're buying at a deeper discount. Now, obviously, low interest rates at a deep discount would be fantastic, but it as prices go down, it presents a viable opportunity even in a higher interest rate environment. So that's the first place I would start with considering it. And then considering when you own your building, it's up to you to hire the maintenance person. It's up to you to fix those things. And so you have to be in a place where you understand the operations of your business. And if that's not you, if you're like, oh my gosh, I don't want to run a building and the business in it, I just like the benefits of real estate and passive income, then I think weighing the financial potential of being a passive investor in a syndication, like what Sandhya does in her investments, and purchasing your own building would be the next analysis phase that I would go through, and saying, what do I expect to get from purchasing this building over a 10-year period? And what do I expect to get from this passive investment? Now, in your building, you may be a little more liquid, meaning that you have control over when you could sell it. You have a little more control, but you have a lot more responsibility as well. And you're also taking on the debt yourself. You are positioning yourself as the owner of that property. You're exposing yourself to legal liabilities. And I think some of the benefits that Sandhya talks about in real estate syndication is as a limited partner, you don't have any of those. And so you would just want to say, which one sounds better for my personality? Sandhya, do you have any thoughts on you are from what I know from you speaking, you are an extremely experienced underwriter, very on the numbers and technical side, like very experienced. What would you say to a person who's considering two options, buy my building or passive investment?
One big thing is always to consider your time. How much time do you have available? Because you might be learning something completely new for which you have no experience. Like when I did my first deal, I had the time. I was a stay-at-home mom with kids in school. So I would spend my entire day learning from experienced partners. And that's the second piece. Don't go do this by yourself as a first-timer. This is commercial loans. You're responsible for other people's safety, liability, etc. You're not just buying your own single-family house and saying, I'm not going to fix that right now. You may have a nail salon next door. You may have everything else. There's so many different hookups, liabilities, etc., associated with the different businesses that you're allowing into your building. I mean, what if you have a vape store? What if you have a store that does interesting business at night? I just don't know, right? The possibilities are endless, but ultimately as the building owner, who knows what could happen, and you're liable for that. So work with somebody with experience if you want to be that owner, and make sure you have the time available for it. Beyond that, I would say always do a break-even analysis. How many of these commercial buildings have to be rented, and how much do I have to get in collections so that I can at least break even and make my mortgage payment and utility payments? Because if you have vacant ones, and commercial, you never know, depending on the location, those leases, somebody moves out, it might take a while for somebody else to move in. So think of the break-even occupancy, break-even dollars, also the repairs that might have to happen over there, and plan for deferred maintenance. Just like we do a physical due diligence of our buildings, you need to understand, okay, what about this roof? How old is it? What about all this, the concrete, the pavement? Do you think it's cheap? Parking lots are some of the most expensive things to fix. And which ones are you liable for? Something as simple as striping can cost you money, So whatever else the lender might impose on you as restrictions and requirements to fix before they will give you the loan, you are responsible for all of those costs. So if you decide to go the active way, don't do it alone. Go passive first. Try it. It's like being a passenger in a plane first before you decide to be the pilot. Partner with somebody with experience and see if you really like the time spent on that. Because a lot of people find it quite boring, and it's not something that is their cup of tea, if you will. They just want to be styling, or in my case, they just want to be engineers in their W-2s, and they want to invest with me.
I think that's brilliant. Jordan, I just wanted to make one comment on the time thing. I think that's one of the most important considerations. And Sandhya, I'm so glad you brought that up, because I think if you are if you're a creative service provider, if you're a creative professional, if you own your business, let's say you have like 16 stylists in a salon, and those are revenue generators. You have to ask yourself, like, what is my time worth if I could get those 16 people earning $200 an hour rather than $100 an hour in your business, right? And that's an area of your expertise where you can probably produce results more reliably and bigger results from a cash flow perspective than trying to go learn an entirely new industry, which is why I think so many doctors, lawyers, dentists, these types of people, they're super busy, super high income earning, and they're smart enough to go, you know what? Fixing toilets and like doing this actively, going and buying all this stuff myself doesn't make sense for me because my time is worth $600 an hour. So it just doesn't make sense to take your time and spend $600 an hour to go learn something that may not make you anywhere near that from a return perspective.
Yeah, two of my passive investors actually own supercut salons. It's kind of funny.
Oh, really?
In this Dallas area.
That's
really?
so interesting.
I used to go there for my haircut all the time, take my son there. And then the owner said, oh, I don't want to do another business. I'm happy with this business. This is what I want to do, but I'll invest with you. And so two of my check writers who've invested in multiple deals with me run supercut salons in this area.
I think that's something that I'm really appreciating about learning about passive investing through syndication. And again, it's really fun to have you on and to have Hunter on and to really give our audience that chance to just understand a side of the world that, well, not only hasn't existed for very long, because I do understand that it didn't always used to be the case that this was possible, but also just that it's not often talked about. You know, we talk about 401ks and Roth IRAs and buying your own building and buying family homes and flipping houses. But I think this side of the world is something that I'm certainly learning about through these conversations. But I think that, you know, Cash, you and I talk a lot about the fact that there are people who, you know, are generating a lot of revenue in their salons. They're generating cash. And the one thing we say to them is like, don't save that cash in a bank and hope that what is it now, 4%, interest rate is going to take you where you need to go. Now, maybe a 401k is appropriate for you. Maybe a Roth IRA, you know, you need to have an investment advisor who can give you that insight or do your own homework. You should always understand your investments, but just being aware that there's a possibility for passive income in dollar amounts that for some business owners, like the Supercuts owner, it's like they have the cash. They want something to do with that cash. They want to put that money to work. But exactly what you said, Cash, is like, I'm doing the math and I don't think that I necessarily want to be a landlord. That's not something I'm interested in. I will point out to you, Cash, that all of the great real estate investors that we have met who are salon owners, Nicole Cumberlander comes to mind. She's another guest from this new season of the podcast that we've done. Her husband is the one that handles the real estate side. So there's a real partnership there so that she's focusing on the salon and the school that she runs, and he takes care of the real estate side. So it's almost a truism of like, you should never really be doing these things alone. It's really helpful when you have a partnership that you're in, exactly to your point, Cash, because maybe there's aspects of that ownership that just doesn't make sense for you to be spending your very high dollar per hour time on.
But we talk about this a lot. So Sandhya, we launched a course 1.5 years ago called Master Your Money. And it's built to introduce, when I earn money, what the heck do we do when we earn money? So like whether you're, you know, just getting started as in
it's
starting
a matter
a business,
of how quickly you can multiply it
and
what you want to do with it, right? What's your long-term goal? Let's say you are 25, maybe not even 30 yet, but you want to retire by the time you're 50. In a 20-year horizon, if your money is left in the bank earning 4%, how is that going to multiply and get you to your retirement goal? You may say, I want to retire with $1 million. That makes sense in today's world, maybe. But in 20 years, that's going to be maybe $5 or $10 million. I don't know what that number actually is going to be like. And so if you just put that into a calculator, you'll realize that, 90% of the world's millionaires do so through some form of real estate. A lot of times your house, you bought a single family home, you left it alone. 10 years later, it's appreciated in value. It's like, wow, real estate appreciates in my market, which is in my case, Dallas, Fort Worth. So I look realistically outside and say, okay, 10 years from today, is the stock market going to give me this much return, or is a building down the street going to be worth more? And I kind of look at that as my big picture. And I say, okay, I need to put money in both. Stock market a little bit for the liquidity in case I need money quickly, but long term, money that I don't need for at least 5 to 10 years kind of horizon. I need to put it in buildings because I really think they're going to appreciate more in value in these markets. And so I look at it on a big picture perspective that way to make my decision.
We asked
Love
Hunter
that.
about this, and I'd love your thoughts as well, because Sandhya, obviously you do your homework. You're in this space. You're very aware of what's happening. I think there's a perception of real estate, even if you're just reading the front page of, whatever your news website is on a given day, where people just have this general sense of like, oh, all the prices went up, and we're about to hit a recession, and values might come down, and buying is slowed down, and interest rates have gone up, and so I definitely think there's a lot of, for lack of a better expression, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, FUD, although I'm not sure it's necessarily intentional, but just people are concerned about real estate as an investment simply because it feels like we're in this very uncertain time in the near term future. So I'm sure you deal with this on a day-to-day basis because you raise capital to invest in real estate. So people must ask you this all the time. What do you say to people when they say, well, yeah, real estate's been great traditionally, but everything's so inflated right now, and I think the prices are going to drop, and I'm not really sure this is a wise investment. Like, what are the things that you, and again, you're putting your money where your mouth is. You said I'm in LP relationships in other states with buildings that I bought. So you're walking the talk here, or talking the walk, or whichever that way that expression goes. How do you think about the future of real estate in an uncertain economic time?
I think that this is when there are opportunities. Like if you think about the 2008 recession, more millionaires were born during that recession than any other in good economic times. So you have to look at it again, especially with real estate, with a long-term horizon kind of picture. 5 to 10 years from now, is a building going to be worth more, or is it my stock in some company going to be worth more versus my money just sitting in the bank, maybe getting 4% interest for the next 12 months? And how is that going to go? And for me, every time it's like, I've got to have some piece of my, portfolio in real estate. There's no doubt in my mind that buildings here are going to be worth more. So that's what I ask my investors. I ask them, do you think the building is going to be worth more in 5 to 10 years or not? That's your question. Don't worry about what happens in 6 months or 12 months. You got to keep the horizon out there in mind. And with your 401k funds, how often do you monitor the performance of your mutual funds? Because I deal with a lot of W-2 friends as my investors, and they put their money into 401k where they have no idea what the fee structure is. They don't know who to call if the market, okay, there's a Ukraine war, there's a Gulf war, there's something happening. Well, my stock goes down, my mutual fund crashes. The guy is still getting his fees. I'm not getting, my portfolio is now worth less than what it was. So if you put 100K into a mutual fund in 2021, it crashed and it's now almost close to getting back to that original principal amount again today. It's not even made money. So, don't worry about short-term market crashes unless you need the cash. So keep your liquid cash and everything else, invest carefully and diversify your portfolio across buildings because they're going to make money. People always will need a place to live. We went through COVID. And despite COVID and everything in the world kind of shut down, people were staying in our apartments and paying their rent. And the first building I bought in 2019 with partners who had experience, we sold it in 2021. We more than tripled people's money. Now, that's probably not realistic to assume that. And we certainly didn't give any kind of a projection like that to investors. In fact, we told them we might 1.7, 1.8x their money in 5 years. We ended up tripling their money in less than 3 years, right? So a building didn't get affected even through COVID. So if that's not a big, stop, the world shut down kind of feeling, I don't know what is. So I feel that real estate is really strong. And I ask them genuinely, what is their biggest fear? Is their biggest fear that you buy a building today for, let's say, 20 million and it's only going to be worth 19 million next year? How does that affect you? Residents still pay rent. The rents go and pay your mortgage. The rents pay your utilities. Whatever is left comes back and cash flows to you. You're not in need of your principal. You get some cash flow. It's going to be at least as much as you get in the bank, probably more. And so just let it sit versus your mutual fund. And you can do a side-by-side comparison.
I think that's really powerful that you said, you have to look at this with a longer time horizon, which I think any wise investor does. And I mean, Warren Buffett is like world famous for the longest time horizon investor, right?
Buying forever, right?
His time horizon is forever, not even 10 years, it's forever.
Right.
And so it seems that, if you're making investments into these things, there's more than just passive income with a real estate syndication like yours. Can you explain again kind of some of the benefits like appreciation, depreciation, tax benefits that also accumulate to what amalgamate to your total return? Meaning you don't see all your return on your check. What are some of the other ways that you get return investing passively?
So let's just say for easy purposes, it's 100K that you invest in a deal today, and the deal says you're going to get about 5% cash flow in your first year. That's $5,000. So let's say you're getting in 2024 $5,000 worth of cash flow. That money is money for which you don't have to pay taxes on that gain, because there's this thing called depreciation. So a 100K deal might get 40 or 50K in depreciation through a study called cost segregation. So you know how you have a building, your air conditioner, et cetera, has a lifespan of 10 years. So with every year that passes, you're depreciating the value of that air conditioner. There is a Trump law, tax law, that was made a few years ago, I think 2019, which allows you to take all of that depreciation over that 10-year period in year one of the items in your building. So all of the equipment. So we employ a cost segregation company. An engineer pays a visit to our property, assesses our property, and gives us a report. And so we get to pass along all of that savings to our investors in year one. And so a 100K deal in 2024 might get a 50K depreciation. So you get a cash flow of 5K. You may not use up all of your 50K in depreciation. So use that just only up to 5K the first year. Maybe the next year it's another 5K. And so you get to keep that 50K for use in the future years. So the cash flow you get from real estate is not taxed. That's the benefit as a passive investor. Now, if you take on an active role like me, yes, there are some more benefits. But at a minimum, if you get a dividend of $5,000 from your stock portfolio, you will be taxed on that. You will be paying, let's say, a third in taxes, so $1,600 or so.
Wow.
That's the biggest tax benefit.
Sorry, and I want to just be clear about this. You get that let's call it $40,000, and it's this depreciation that, as a limited partner, is allocated to you, and then you get to decide with your CPA what your depreciation schedule is of that total amount. So Correct. You're saying, I can say to the government, and let's get really basic here because I want people to understand depreciation because they may not know that, right? You can say, hey, government, I spent $100,000, but I lost $40,000 in the depreciating assets in my investment. I just made $5,000, but I'm going to take out of that $40,000, $5,000 of that depreciation and apply it to the revenue that or basically add it to my tax returns, so that I say to the government, look, yes, I made $5,000, but I also lost $5,000 in value. And then what I'm understanding is that you're saying the next year you now have $35,000 in depreciation available to you to use. And if you sold a bunch of stock that year and you have a high, I'm going to go out on a limb here, tell me if I'm doing this right, and you have a high capital gains interest, you can say, but I also lost half of that depreciation from my building and apply it to the gains you made somewhere else to balance out your overall tax liability. Is that correct? That depreciation can be applied wherever, as long as it's within the same legal entity?
It needs to be within the same category. So real estate passive losses can offset real estate, be offset by the gains. But unless you're an active real estate professional, which is what I am, and in that case, yes, I can apply it even to my husband's W-2.
Okay.
Like he's got an employment. But passive losses help you offset passive gains within the same bucket. So that's real estate.
So, but you could just then apply that to the dividend you're getting.
Correct.
So what is that?
From this one real estate investment every year.
Right. So you're basically, you're really able to lock in the sort of quote tax-free nature of that dividend that's coming back to you. I mean, Cash, I don't even think I understood that. I mean, of course I didn't. I'm learning. That's really, really
depreciation, I'm going through a big cost segregation right now on some new acquisitions. And it's one of the most powerful wealth building tools. Because the taxes that you pay on your income are the biggest no return loss you will pay on anything in your entire business. So if you make $100,000 in your business and you owe $30,000 in tax, you don't get anything back for that, other than maybe whatever the government decides to spend it on that may or may not benefit you personally. But it's the biggest cost typically in your business that has the lowest return, meaning you get nothing for it. And so, but with real estate, if you made let's say you made the $100,000, and you were able to take $100,000 in depreciation, you would get to keep the full 100,000, meaning you made $30,000 more in real estate than you would have in your active income, right? Because you didn't have to pay those taxes. Now, what's really powerful with depreciation over time is that income earned over time with the benefit of depreciation really, really, really builds up. So if you could earn $100,000 every year and keep 100% of it, you could build your wealth quite a bit faster than you could if a 30% chunk was being taken out of it every single time, right? So, right. And that's where the power of real estate, taking passive losses against passive gain, is such a powerful thing, because you are getting essentially untaxed income. And that is the magic of these situations. Now, again, like Sandhya said, you can't take active losses against passive income and those types of things, right? So it only applies to the category of the income that the IRS puts that activity into. So there's passive activity and there's active activity. To be an active investor or operator, I think for real estate, the qualification is 750 or 749 hours. Sandhya, you know how much it is to be considered active? It's 700 something, I think.
It's 750 hours if you're like me, which was, I was a stay-at-home mom without another job. But if you're working a full-time job, then it's a lot more hours than that, because what they really want to know is this your primary job or primary, way of making money? So if you're also doing something else, like my husband has a full-time W-2 job, it would be really hard for him to qualify as a real estate professional. And always, for all of these accounting things, you want to check with your CPA. So have that conversation with them before you decide to invest based on just tax benefits. And then the second piece is you have to put your money, if you're looking at retirement money, you have to put it in a self-directed IRA or a solo 401k, whichever you qualify for. So the typical traditional IRA will not allow you to invest in real estate, like, a mobile home park or multifamily or a self-storage or RV park, etc. So you want to make sure if you have a prior employer or old 401k funds, you can roll it into a self-directed IRA, which allows you the capability to invest in assets besides the stock market.
Is that what you're doing with these professionals that you work with? So you mentioned that primarily you raise money from people who are high net worth or high income generating professionals. Are they often taking the money that they were otherwise putting into their retirement plan and then rolling it into a self-directed IRA, or do they just have cash? Is it a little bit of both?
It's a little bit of both. And a lot of them, especially in high tech, tend to switch jobs every few years. And they forget that they have all of this 401k money sitting with their previous employer. And it's not money they're counting on in the near term. So at least for their first or second investment, writing a 50K check might be a little scary for some of them. And so they write it from retirement funds, which means, hey, it's not funds I'm counting on anytime in the near future. The only thing is, when it's retirement funds, you're not taking advantage of all of these tax, depreciation, etc. That's just not used. But when they use their cash, yes, for sure. When they use their regular cash funds, they get all the depreciation advantages. So it's a combination of both. A lot of engineers get awarded stock options as part of their compensation package during their annual review. So that becomes a large chunk of money. So they're looking to place it in something. So they want to diversify instead of putting it with the same financial planner or the same mutual fund. And that's when they come to me and say real estate. And a lot of them are familiar with my market. So that makes them feel more comfortable with investing in a market in real estate where landlord, friendly states without all of these rent control laws, et cetera, is happening. And people are more hands-on. That really gives them a sense of comfort when they know that the operator is local to the property.
And knowing your market is a critical part of that. The market has a lot to do with the performance of an asset. And that's why I think,
Yeah. I've lived in the Dallas area for 33 years, so I really know my market. So when I'm the active operator, I invest everything in here in the Dallas market. And so I also invest with people who are local to their markets. Like I have an investment in Phoenix, I have one in Tennessee, Nashville, etc. But there's somebody local who can just check on the properties frequently, and that's a big deal for me. So you don't have to live where you invest when you do passive investments. And so that's a great advantage. You could live in California. You might love your beaches and sunshine and your high-tech job or your salon, etc. And then you can invest in a property in Nashville or Dallas or whichever market where somebody is local and they will be looking after the property on a regular basis.
So if somebody wanted to say, Sandhya, I'm interested in learning more about investing with you and learning more about what you do, where could they find you?
LinkedIn is a great place. My website is engineered-capital.com. Engineered Capital is the name of my company, or Facebook, or through Jordan and Cash would be another easy way to find me, because it's because of them that I'm connecting to you.
We'll have your website in the show notes. And yeah, Sandhya, thank you so much for this. I'm really excited anytime we can bring a perspective or new knowledge to someone that maybe they just weren't otherwise going to be aware of. Hunter made a great point that I'll end us here with, which of course is that you must do your homework before making any kind of investment. You made a great point as well, which is, look, do your homework, but also don't sit around, make a decision, set a timeline for yourself. But when it comes to that homework, which I think you agree is important, where should someone start? Is there a book you'd recommend? Is there a podcast? Where do you find that is a great sort of setting a person on a course to just making the most educated decision they can?
I have a free checklist available on my website. It's simply a list of 15 questions to follow through, and don't compromise on those values. So the first one is a background check. What is the track record of the team? Verified by a passive investor. Who is boots on the ground? Have they actually operated a similar asset in that area? Versus, if I suddenly want to go to a new market, who is knowledgeable in that market, etc. So I have a list of questions they can definitely use. And there are also, several websites and guides for that. And, follow along the content from great podcasts. So The Best Ever is a good podcast, Cash Flow Connections. Certainly yours is a great podcast to follow along, because knowledge nowadays is available in so many different ways. So whichever way you absorb it the best. Like if you have a long commute every day to work and you want to be listening to a podcast each day and make some notes from that, that's a great way to learn.
Amazing. Sandhya, thank you so much for coming and speaking. It's been a pleasure.
Seriously.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you.
If you're a hairstylist, if you're a creative professional, and you are interested in your financial well-being, remember to like and subscribe so that more episodes just like this one show up in your YouTube feed.